Hello and welcome. How are you guys doing? Good conference so far? Well, what so far? It's like this is it. This is the we made it through 3 days of NDC goodness, great sessions, diving into all kinds of good stuff. So, what are you guys here for? Why is I can't see anyone, so I don't know. The room looks full to me. Um, My name is Mike, and imagine you are handed a pile of bricks, a hammer, maybe some nails. You've got, the boards, and you're told to go and build a fortress. You've got to build something, and it's got to be right. It's got to be strong. It's got to be able to repel invaders. It's got to stand it's got to stand the time. Kind of like that castle over here, the fortress over by the water. 1300? How cool is that? I'm like, if I want to go out and build something like that, I'm an engineer. I'm a builder. My name's Mike Benkovich, and I used to do a lot of talks. This was the reason why I did it, because my girls. But now I actually have a granddaughter, which is actually really really cool. But if you're interested in information about me, I'm a enterprise cloud architect, I guess, or maybe an engineer, cloud engineer. How many people are architects? Okay, I can't see anything. So we're gonna have to use voices, right? If you're an architect, say yeah. If you're a engineer, say yeah. If you're a coder, all right. How about project manager? An accountant? No. There's a lot of things that we do, and I'm from Minneapolis. I've been doing this stuff for a while. I used to work at Microsoft, and I was a developer evangelist for Visual Studio. So for a lot of years, I talked about all the things you could do to go out and build with Visual Studio, these great tools. And we had architects on our team who would talk to the architect audience, but mine was usually the developer audience, people who are building code, making things work. How do we go out and do that? And over the time, I helped launch a number of different things, from SQL Server to SharePoint to Windows Vista, which no one really seemed to like, and Windows 8, which they liked even less. But then, all of the other things that we've done. We also launched this thing called Azure, and this cloud idea. And how do we go out and build stuff? I left Microsoft about 12 years ago now, 13 years back in 2012. And I've been doing consulting ever since then, helping people understand how they can build applications that use the cloud out there. And if you're interested in chatting or talking, if you have questions or whatever, I do an Azure office hours on Fridays where you can go out to Calendly, book some time, and we'll talk about anything Azure. I'd love to hear what you're doing and whatever. And if I don't know all the answers. I used to do a talk called Tour de Azure, and we used all 12 of the services in Azure. Back when there was 12 services, you can imagine how long ago that was. It was 2010. Today there's 175 services. So like I could do a talk where I just read the names of them, and it's an hour long. 175 of these different things. But if you want to talk about anything Azure, I don't know all the answers, but I can connect you with people that do. But getting back to our challenge, we want to go out and we want to build something. And as engineers, it's gratifying when you go out and you put something together. It's like I built a staircase, and I can go back and I can see that, and I can walk up and down it 10 years later, and it's still, solid. And building stuff in the cloud, you don't always see what you've got. In fact, sometimes it happens that things don't go the way you want, and if I start building without a plan, how do I ensure that I have the kind of, solid things that I need? And the danger is that if you're building without blueprints, you're just kind of praying that things work. Yeah, I know how to use a hammer, and I, can build a staircase, but it's a lot better if I know how tall the floor needs to be. Right? Oh yeah, this is a great staircase. It's 3 feet short, but it's beautiful. Well, it isn't going to do anyone any good. And yet, when we go out to the cloud, how many people use Azure and have gone out to the Azure portal? And you click on deploy, And it's like, cool. And you get your web application and then you go to the tool and you put your code out there and everything works. And it's like, wow, this is great. And then they'd say, okay, well, let's make this repeatable, right? So that's where we come to, how do we do this in a way so that other people can duplicate, can follow along and do it? Living in the portal, you end up with nuances. I mean, the portal is a great thing. It's a great place to go out and work with Azure. But the portal does change. I don't know if anyone's noticed that. I was doing a talk in Redmond, of all places, and I was talking about how you can use the portal to go out and create these different things. And I came back the next day, and the portal was different. Features come and go. And in fact, I sat down with one of the product managers of the Azure portal itself. He says, yeah, we release it twice a day, new features. I mean, the whole continuous thing. I mean, with 175 services, I mean, it's a constantly evolving thing. And so when you're looking and trying to go out and build infrastructure as a Word document, or infrastructure as a series of steps to go out and do this, go to in the portal, there's a section, and it's like that section doesn't exist anymore. It's like, okay, how do I live with this? Does anyone have infrastructure as a document? I worked with a startup company last year, the year before. They did infrastructure as a YouTube. Sure. I've got a couple of courses on LinkedIn Learning where I do infrastructure as, and the portal's gone. It's like everything is different. But it's like when you are trying to go out and create something, click to deploy. It's probably not the place you want to be, because being able to create something that's repeatable is of the essence. And it's something that we all really, really need to, figure out how we can do that. So, just be careful. Going to code is creating something that is repeatable. I love the portal, really do. I manage a lot of different infrastructure. I go to the portal, I change my scaling rules. I, will shut things down. I'll delete stuff, and I'll use the portal a lot. But if I'm not the one that's going out to do the building and I have to hand it off to another engineer or another person on my team, I need to have something that's code. And by being code, that means it's declarative, it's defined, it's versioned, right? And I know that everyone here loves code because, what's NDC if it's not all about coding and building stuff? But being able to use Git, being able to use a source code repository that allows us to be able to see how we are building things, right? It's repeatable. We can catch environmental drift. I know a lot of people in here, are probably further along on the journey of getting to good infrastructure as code than others, and there's different paths that you're on. And I don't expect everyone to be like, yeah, we all need to be at day 6. We're all learning as we go. Some of the places I've worked, it's been a very simple thing is, using the Azure CLI to go out and create, something that's repeatable. But there's a lot of options out there, a lot of tools, and trying to figure out which ones should I use. What is my skill set? Am I a C# developer, right? And I've got my team and they know how to do C#. Are there ways that I can go out and build this using C#? Well, yeah, there are. Or Terraform. How many people use Terraform? Say, yeah. That's a lot of people. How about Bicep? Okay. How many of you are using Pulumi? Yeah. What about AzAPI? What is AzAPI? AVMs, Azure Verified Modules. So there's patterns and practices that are out there, but we aren't all up to the same speed on this. And one of the things I found is that the first time I did this talk, I spent almost the entire time trying to show the tools in action, because as a developer, I want to see what does the editor experience look like? How can I go out and build these things? With AI, with the ChatGPT, the co-pilots, and all these things, it's become almost trivial to be able to go out and say, okay, well, I want to create this infrastructure, do it in Pulumi using Ruby or using Go. it goes out and does it. I want to add a key vault and connect the stuff, and I want to put a storage account, and I want to have all of that stuff. The way that we try to pick a tool is getting to the point where we have to understand the trade-offs of each one of those. And so today, for the next 45 minutes or so, how much time do we have? Yeah, about 45 minutes. I want to go through some of those options. We'll talk about ARM and Bicep, which are the Microsoft resource management. We'll talk about the Terraform. We'll talk about AzAPI, which is another provider for Terraform that you can deploy into Azure. But we'll just kind of dive into this. The Azure CLI is probably the first place that people go to anymore. I mean, this has not always been that way, but I go AZ login and I can see, here's my account, AZ account show, and see what my account is. I can do an AZ group list minus O table, and I can see all the tables and all the groups. And it's almost second nature. If I go into, I've got a site here, and I'm going to close out the Copilot because I really don't need to see that yet. But I've got a repo, and I'll put it out on the site so you guys can get out to it. But I've got down here, if I do a control period, open up the terminal, and I can make this a little bit bigger. Eventually, this will come back. And I'm going to close that, make this big. How many people use Visual Studio as your main tool? And holding up your hands, I can see some hands going up. I'm guessing about half. How about VS Code? I can sort of see some things happening there too. But and then what about other tools? What other tools like Writer? Yep. Emacs. Yep. There's a lot of tools, but code is code. And from the AZ CLI, if I do this, and it comes back, please open a terminal here. Control period. I click on this, I say AZ, and my keyboard's not working. So just disconnect the keyboard and reconnect it, see if that does anything. And that sort of works. There we go. AZ account show minus O table. I love AZ. AZ is a great way I can go out. They even include surveys and text now. I can see I'm logged into the DevDad sandbox. I can do an AZ group list minus O table. It'll list all of my resource groups that I've got in there if I had logged in. Which means we need to do an AZ login, which then says pick the account. I don't like that way of doing it, by the way. But if we go to, where is that? So I'm not even sure if this is responding to me or not. Not really important. The idea is that with the AZ commands, I can go out and I can do things like create resource groups. I can do a command like this, where I've got some variables. I'm a PowerShell developer. I tend to write in PowerShell by default because I run on Windows Surface-y type machines. But if you're using Bash or using a Linux or a Mac, I can go out and I can set my variables. I use that a lot for naming things. How many people are focused on like your cloud governance? That's something that everyone loves to do, right? Governance? Right. What is governance? How do you name things? Right? You never ask Microsoft how to name something. Number one, they don't know how to count, but beyond that, it's like, okay. But if you have a naming pattern, it helps you find stuff. And so I find that in everything I do, I always try to have a naming pattern and a tagging pattern so I can find things and I can be able to organize my resources. Because inside of Azure, there's a lot of stuff out there. Using the PowerShell, I can go out and I can say, here's my resource group name. I'm going to use the app name and environment name, and I'll calculate out, oh, that's not good. Let's get out of that. Let's get this here. Let's try this again. Okay, that's different. Go to duplicate so I can see what you're seeing. Sorry about that. So here's our, go out and create a resource group, and I can pass in the name. It'll go out and create things. I could put tags on there, and pretty much it allows me to go out and do this. And when I've got simple infrastructure, this is a really nice way to go out and do it. For instance, I can do AKS create an AKS cluster, and I can have that generate the cluster in a pretty consistent way. But I am losing a little bit on the complexity, because while this is great for simple scenarios and also really good for being able to see and monitor and use it, I find that it's a little bit limiting when it comes to doing more complex things. For instance, creating a network, a VNet, is a sort of a complex thing. If you don't think it's a complex thing, it's a complex thing. And figuring out how you want to design your subnets, your IP blocks, your space size, especially with like AKS, where I'm running a Kubernetes cluster, and I've got to make sure that that I've got enough addresses there, and I've got to be able to route between them. And you have network security groups, and you've got firewall rules, and I'm going to create a AKS cluster, but not create the VNet. Well, you can do it. It does work with the Azure CLI, but usually you want something that is more imperative, where I go out and describe what the shape of this infrastructure that I want it to be, so that when I make changes to it, I can have the tools figure out what things need to change to be able to bring it to where I want to get it to, right? And so that's where the ACI is, okay. The first place to go, or the first place I went to, was ARM. Azure Resource Manager. In 2014-ish, they said, the old classic deployment was limiting, and so they went to the Resource Manager, where they store everything in a JSON format, which is the same format that ARM uses, Azure Resource Manager. Declarative, I can go out and describe all these different complex things, how they fit together and how they work. The basic template has a structure that includes a schema, which says, how is this all defined. I've got a content version, parameters, variables, resources, outputs. There might be a couple of other things that are in there. I think functions might be one. But the idea is that I go out and I define a resource in JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, which is where I've got all of the different name of the property and then the value. And for JSON, it's a great way of representing data. If it's great for representing data, is it great for human readability? Yeah, sometimes. But what it is good about is that I can go out and I can define out exactly what I want, and I can embed things, and I can make this work. Nice thing about it is I can create like an app service plan, which would have, I want to run an application, a website. So I'm going to put an app service plan in a site. And so I'm going to create this in the ARM template. And if you're looking at how do I get started writing ARM templates, Visual Studio does have a resource group project type. I'm not going to show it because they stopped updating it about 8 years ago. It is a starting spot, but I highly encourage getting into something like VS Code or someplace that's got the extensions that you can use that have been updated. And if you're writing the code, it's a great place to go. AI also does a really good job of working with this. So just be aware that, as much fun as it is to go out and show how to do all the writing the code, why are we writing the code is kind of the thing. Inside the Azure portal, let me show this. So this is not it. This is my website, Benko Tips. Here's my home. I've got a bunch of resource groups that I go out to. Is that readable? Is that big enough? I can make it bigger if needed, but if I look at a resource group where I've deployed some stuff, one of the nice things in the portal is I can go out and I can say, hey, here's this thing, and I've got this ARM plan that was created, and I've got the site, and I've got a couple of other things that are deployed here. Because it is the resources.azure.com, if I go to this and I type in resources, resources.azure.com. It'll go ahead and log me in. If you didn't know that this was here, this is kind of how Azure manages stuff in the backside. So I've got my list of subscriptions. I can go to the sandbox. I can come down to my resource groups. And each time I look at something, like here's a resource group, I can see, here's the resource group, the privileges, the properties. I can see the things that are deployed inside here, all the resources. You can see that it's all JSON, which is good. And if I want to get to a particular resource, I could take this ARM site and I could come over here and I could go down into the portal. And by the way, on the portal, I don't know if you've noticed, but they make it really easy to find stuff by, no, they don't. In fact, you probably come to the portal and it's like, they decided it would be easier if they just hid everything. So if you go over to your appearance and you say, oh yeah, here's my appearance on this, and they've got it all, this and collapsed, the service menu behavior. So when you do this, this makes it even easier. You come over to Azure and I go to, let's go out and reload the page. If I go to this resource group, now these are all by default all collapsed. You can't find anything. So I always change that back. So I'm going to change it back right now. Appearance, yeah. Expanded, apply. Anyway, coming back to the resource group for this, if I want to see this particular thing and I want to go and look at it, I can come down to the bottom and I can see down here is export template. And here it'll go out and it'll generate the template for me. And this is one of the things that in talking to the portal team, I love how they give this little tiny bit of real estate to the actual template. And they've got all this other noise around it. But it does go out and it'll generate the template for what I'm working with. And it's very readable. It's very easy. Yeah, this is why people love ARM. Because I can go here and I can say, here's all this stuff. And yeah, if I make this a little bit smaller like that, you can see all the properties and things like that. If I zoom in over here, you can see there's the different parts of the template. I can see the naming. It's okay. One of the things you may not have noticed, but they did include this, is they have Bicep. So I can export the same thing as a Bicep template now. And you might say, why would I want Bicep? What is that? Well, if you look at this, this looks like a different kind of a thing. It's got parameters and it's got resources and it's got variables, and the actual resources themselves are a little bit more readable, not JSON. Almost Terraform-ish-esque. Not that anyone would do that. Because, no, yeah. Anyway, there's tools for getting started with it. It's native to Azure because it is Azure. The resources.azure.com. This is where Azure stores its state, all of the stuff. You can view the deployments. I can see the deployments in the portal. So if I go over here to the portal, I can see here's my deployments. Go up to the resource group. And I can actually expand this down to deployments. And I can say, here's the deployment. When I ran it, there's the site. If I click that, I can actually get to the deployment details. I can see the template that was used. I can see exactly how it was built. I can see here's how I did my naming. So I'm concatenating the parameters to get to the standard naming, and I pass in a couple of parameters and it generates that particular thing. But if I don't like the verbosity of how JSON really is meant for data storage and not so much for human readability, that's where they created this thing called Bicep. Where'd they get the name for Bicep? ARM moves the... I don't name things. Microsoft. Anyway, what is Bicep? Bicep is a language transpiler. And when I say transpiler, what I mean is I write something in a language and its output is JSON, is ARM. So I can take an ARM template and I can decompile it into Bicep. And the Bicep gives me something that's a lot more readable. I've got variables and I can use modules, I can use loops. There's all kinds of things I can do that make it work a whole lot more intuitively than what might have been if I had done it all in ARM. Because it is based on ARM, it's 100% available all the time. It's current with what Azure is. When you deploy a new service in Azure, they go to the resource management team and they say, here's my new resource. And that's how they publish new resources. So Bicep is 100% up to date. It is a domain-specific language for Azure, which means I can't use Bicep to go out and create stuff in New Relic or in AWS or other places. There's no cost. There's no state files to manage. And it's a pretty nice experience. The language itself has a number of different features. I set the target scope. I set parameters where I have parameter names. I've got variables. I can create resources, modules, and outputs. Kind of like what was in the ARM template. When you look at how they define it, parameters have decorators on them. So I can say how long I want things to be. I can put requirements that things are at least this size or have, follow a certain pattern. I can have allowed values. So you might have a checklist of, I only want, whatever the data centers are. When I create variables, I can use the single tick and then use the curly brace to take the name of a variable or a parameter and be able to operate on that, which is kind of a nice string interpolation type of a thing. So when I create my naming standard, it's like, I just go through and do that. When I refer to a resource, there's a number of defaults, and I don't have to reference the defaults if they're default. If I want to change them, I can, but for a server plan, this is a whole lot more readable than what was on the ARM template. Would you agree? And even those of us who are working with Terraform, that looks like a Terraform resource almost, sort of. Well, we don't need to go there, right? Because that's a whole different technology, but we are going to go there. Getting started with Bicep is I can take my ARM template and I can decompile it, and I can create a Bicep file from that, and I can extend it. So for instance, in my application, I created and that is probably too big. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. I created an infrastructure folder in this repo, and I have an ARM folder where I've got my site. And in here, you'll see that here's my functions, here's my variables, site name, plan name, and then the resources for server farms and some configuration data. If I take this and I go to, and I killed this off, right click, kill terminal. And I do this again. For whatever reason, my terminal is not working. But what I would do is I would run the AzBicep decompile command, and it would generate the output of that being this file right here, which is the Bicep version of that. The parameters are all named at the top. I've got some resources. I've got this output. If I take a look at the main Bicep, this is going to consolidate and work with a lot of different types of things. I've got modules I create, which is just a folder or just a file, another Bicep file. So in here, I've got a resource group where I'm going to create the resource group with that name. I've got a plan, which is going to be using the plan file. If I come down here and I just start typing module, let's do this, resource, and let's create a key vault. And it's going to be a type key vault. And if you look here, there's my vaults, and I can say, here's my key vault, and then I get all of the different schema versions that are out there. So which version do you want to use? There's new features added at different times. I can make sure I pin it to a particular version of that schema, which is actually a really nice thing. So I can say, yeah, we're going to use this preview version from there. And I'm going to say equals to, and I'll use the required properties, which then comes down and says, here's the required properties I need. Name, location, SKU, family, and then I can fill in those values. And if I do that, then I can go out and deploy this and be able to use all the parameters and things like that that I've got. In here, I've got a site that's going to go out and it does a loop. So for every item in the list, I'm going to go out and I'm going to create a series of these. So I'm going to create app name, item name, and I'll create a different set of parameters or resource groups, whatever that is. But it's like looping and working with variables and stuff like that inside of Bicep is pretty straightforward, and it's got some really nice capabilities. Any questions on ARM or Bicep before we move on? Yeah. So before I stepped on that, what? So how do I structure the Bicep code? Because code structuring is important to us. In a folder, I will have a main Bicep file, which I use as my orchestrator. And I will usually target like the subscription level in that, and I'll create resource groups and other things. I'll use modules, which are other files in that same folder. And so if I want to use like a verified module or something like that, I can reference a module from another location, but I basically can structure the file. I like to put the like naming things in the front of the file so I can find it later on. You'll see in my Terraform code that that's how I do it there too. Does that answer your question? Other questions? Okay. All right. So ARM and Bicep, yeah. Everyone? If you haven't looked at it, the nice thing is I don't have to worry about state. Not that it state's that hard, we live in a state of disarray. All right. So let's come back to Earth here, to Terraform. What is Terraform? Yes. I know about half the room said that they're using it. So, the basics is it's another way of going out and or being able to describe out the shape of a deployment. And I can do almost everything that I can do inside of Azure. And it's created by HashiCorp, a company that has just been acquired by IBM. Maybe I shouldn't talk about that kind of stuff. But they've got an open source version of Terraform, and there's a paid version of Terraform. And I know using it, I've found a lot of places use Terraform. Some of my clients, we use Bicep. Some of them use Terraform. And it's a equally good system for going out and building out and deploying infrastructure. The HCL language is Terraform language. It goes out and describes your resources. It's sort of like, it's not a YAML format, but it's sort of like that. It's multi-cloud, it's provider-based. I can create a provider for different things. One thing I really like about Terraform is I can use Terraform to create stuff in New Relic. I use Terraform to monitor things in Datadog. I use Terraform to create stuff in Google. I use Terraform to create stuff in Azure. Cross, not just cloud, but different services. And like info blocks, which you might use for your DNS and names and stuff like that. I can actually use Terraform to create a provider to go out and generate that stuff for me. So as a infrastructure platform engineer, I want to be able to go out and create my platform, and I want to find everything that works with it. Terraform is great because I can do that all in one place. Now, one of the challenges is that it is a third party, and it's up to date in terms of the new services coming out are dependent on teams getting up to date and getting the new features out there. They do version Terraform on a different schedule than what Azure does, but for the most part, it's very up to date. Installing it, I installed it on this machine with Choco, with Chocolatey, which is a way to go out and just make sure that the executable is in the path. And the way that a Terraform deployment works is it works with a folder structure where all my files are in a workspace. that workspace, I might put my main Terraform file. I might have other Terraform files. The Terraform executable itself will take all of those files, combine them together, and then organize and figure out what's changed from the last time I ran this, and then go out and actually do those things. I go out, I initialize the folder. It'll look at the providers I'm using, download the things that I need, and then it'll go out and execute and run against my stuff. I can create variable files. In Bicep and in ARM, I've got parameter files I can use to create an environment. I can just point to them. In Terraform, it's a little bit more tricky because it uses that folder when I go out and run stuff. And maybe I'll be able to show that. I'm hoping I can. Terraform providers for Azure RM is the one that has been out the longest. The newer one, AzAPI, is coming out because they're addressing a number of different issues, but we'll talk about that in a second. I basically go out and define what my provider is going to be. I can go out and create variables, same way I did in other languages. I create it with a variable with the name of it, and then I use double quotes, and I specify the type, the default, and things like that. I can have lists. I can have different types of variables. I can create a locals section, which in an opinionated way that I do it is I like to have my locals where I define the names of all of my services, and I do that up front. And then I reference those locals in the different files and places. Maybe it's just a pattern that I follow. But I'll do that for like my resource group name. I'll create a prefix variable or local, and I'll use that. So, I'll use the local prefix in the host name, site name, key vault name. And then I go out and define resources. Just like in Bicep, it's a lot more readable than what the JSON was that had all of the extra noise. It's very cleaned up. And I can specify, how I want my stuff to go out and build. So with that, I run a series of different commands. Terraform init initializes the environment. I do Terraform plan, goes out and runs the plan. The apply applies the plan, destroy destroys things. There's also a Terraform state command where I can work with the state that it saves all this information in. Let me go over to this, and I'm going to close that and reopen it. And I'm going to do, please open the terminal. There we go. So I'm in the folder here, and I can cd into my infra/Terraform folder, which is down here. And my Terraform folder, I have a main Terraform file where I'm using the Azure RM provider. I've got a data where I reference existing stuff that's already in Azure. I've got variables, locals, resources, the site. I've got a couple of other things that get created for me, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to take that and delete it. So imagine this is a nice clean folder, and I've got just the main file and the parameters. When I'm in that folder, I run the command Terraform init. And it'll initialize the backend, and what it's going to do is it's going to go and download all of the different providers and things it needs. It's going to make sure that everything looks and works correctly. Now, I'm doing a very simplified deployment here. And because of that, I'm not defining a backend state to be somewhere except for just on my local machine. It's important to understand what state is and how it fits into where Terraform runs. But if I do a Terraform plan, it would go out and run a plan for this. But I can just do a Terraform apply and just shortcut it. And so I'm going to do that. And so what this does is it asks me for my parameters because I didn't tell it to use the parameters. So my app name is going to be NDC 25. Let's do that again. NDC 25. I'm going to give it a color, say maroon, And then it's going to go out and it's going to take these different things and it's going to take a look and say, what do I need to do to be able to make that work? So on this AZ login scope, and this is the login piece that I was going to run earlier. So let's copy that and let's run this. And actually, let's use device code. Use device code. I think this is going to work. Yeah. So I can copy this, go into Azure or the device login. It says here's the code, logging in. And once I'm logged in, I can pick the account I'm going to run with, say yes and continue. And there's my Azure CLI. So I've signed in. And so now down here, I'm authenticated. And so with the Terraform commands, it'll use my Azure credentials locally to be able to go out and figure out what to do. So we'll let that kind of click through here for a second. And while I'm doing that, any questions about Terraform?
How about Tofu? Is that Terraform get
Tofu? Like an open source Terraform? I haven't really played with that. That's new to me. Be worth checking out. Let me see here. So if I do Terraform, let's do this AZ account show minus O table. And I'm in the right thing. And then we go Terraform apply. NDC 25 and blue. Then I still get the fun stuff where, so we try that again. Now, how many people have been to sessions where they actually had everything worked right the first time? I mean, what's a conference without, like live demos? And then it's like, and it's like you might be saying, oh, wow, look, he's got all these problems. Maybe I'm doing this on purpose. Maybe not. So if I had not deleted the Terraform file, I could show you the Terraform state, what it would look like. And what it looks like is like one of those things that has all the details. One of the things to be aware of is that in using Terraform, the state file saves everything in plain text. And what that means is that, why does it do that? First, well, you don't put it into source control, please. Your state file should not go into source control, but for being able to manage what's out there, I need to be able to see exactly all the different pieces. So if it's in plain text and I've created a SQL database has a password stored in the state file in plain text. Because if you need the password, right? So you just need to know where the state file is. And if you can get to the state file, well, maybe that's not a good thing. State files should be locked down. It should be prevented. And you can store a state file in Azure, Google, AWS. There's places where you can do that. But when you do that, it's stored in a storage account. Make sure you think about where you're locking that stuff down, because that's very important to do. In the interest of time, I'm going to continue on here. Well, look at that. There it is. Here we go. I love the new identity management tools that Microsoft is releasing, because it just makes my demos work so much better. And there's going to go do that again. Assuming it gets to the end, what I would do is I would go in Terraform. I can do the create, apply. I can do destroy to tear down the infrastructure when I'm done. And it's all good. So now if I do the Terraform apply, NDC 25, red. We've switched through different colors on this, by the way, because I know that red is the one that it was looking for it all to work. And now you can see, here's all of the stuff that it wants to go out and create. And so it'll create a site config, it'll create all this different stuff. I can go out and I can say yes, and it'll actually go out and it'll provision this inside of my Azure subscription, and then I'd be able to go out and see my NDC resource group and everything else. One thing I won't see, and if I look in the Azure portal, is deployments, because it's not doing ARM deployments. It's doing it through exercising the APIs. And so this resource group goes out and creates stuff. It's reasonably fast. We use it for a lot of different things, and but the challenge is it is up to date to a point. And yeah, so it's good. But it's not always current. So Azure RM was written by a team at Microsoft led by Alex Frankel. The team also does ARM, Bicep. They do the integration, and they basically make so Azure can integrate and work with other things. The challenge with Azure RM as a provider is that there's bugs. It's also a little bit out of date. There's a lot of different services, 175 plus services. Every one of them constantly updating at different cadences, and the backlog is getting harder to keep up with and make sure everything continues to work. And it is dependent on the community contributions. What AzAPI is it's a way of using the Azure REST endpoints to go out and exercise the provisioning of different things, but still using your Terraform description. The big difference is that instead of using Azure RM as your resource provider, you're using the AzAPI resource. Looks very similar, except you'll notice I've got the API version in the type. So I can specify exactly which version of that thing I want to run. Things like Kubernetes, where I've got new features come and go, and it's a very complex beast. This makes it so that I can make sure that my stuff is going to continue to run, and it's always up to date. So the guidance, Azure RM may go away someday, and AzAPI will be the way you go out and do the deployments. When you run a deployment, instead of using the Terraform commands, you'll use the AzRest command, and you'll do a put to the API endpoint, with the body being the plan, which is the AzAPI file. Does that make sense? I know it's infrastructure as code, and it's so cool, and it's code. We like code. Yeah, but it is complex. Pulumi is a really interesting thing. I have not yet had an opportunity to use Pulumi in production, but I know a lot of friends who swear by it and love it. What it is it's like an SDK that I can use to extend to my language. So I can go to Python, JavaScript, whatever my language is, and I can do infrastructure as almost a product, where I'm going to go out and I'm going to provision maybe a storage account that my customer needs. And instead of doing a check-in on some GitHub repo, I want to be able to provision this on demand. So Pulumi allows me to go out and do that. Pulumi is a third party, supports lots of different cloud providers, follows the modern coding things. The way that it looks is, if you're a C# programmer, this is the app service plan in C#. I create a variable, I create a class called the app service plan, which has a constructor for the plan name and the arguments. The arguments have some constructors for the resource group name and the other properties. So basically, it's a kind of a cascading way of going out and saying, I'm going to create my infrastructure that's going to look like this. Same thing if you look at a Go example. This is a little bit small, so I'll zoom in. Here I'm going to go out and I'm using the Go language, setting my environment name. I create a resource group where I pass in the parameters, how I want that to look. I use the context. Looks like my finger can draw on the screen. But it's a great way of going out and being able to build infrastructure. There's a learning curve to it, but there's a learning curve to everything, right? Questions about Pulumi? When I do a deployment on Pulumi, I do the command Pulumi up, and it actually goes out to the Pulumi website, and that actually exercises and talks to Azure on my behalf. So I need to have my credentials stored somewhere that the Pulumi service is able to run that. There is a cost. Pretty easy to get started. Azure Verified Modules is a answer to trying to provide, the golden template. So they take different infrastructure patterns, like, hey, I've got a website, or maybe I've got a containerized app, or I've got an IoT hub and I need to go out and deploy this. Inside of GitHub, they've got a number of different verified ways of doing that. So you can use that as your starting point and then customize and extend it. The verified modules are tested and maintained, and they're support the cross-language things. But you can go out to GitHub /Azure AVMs, and inside of here you can see, here's the different directories and be able to dive into it. If you want to contribute, you can. So that is verified modules. So which one is best? Terraform? They're all good. And it's like, and I look at anything and it's like, there's a number of different considerations. Where am I at? It's a consultant answer. It depends. Here, I'll send you a bill. It depends, because where are you at and what are you trying to do and where do you want to be, 3 years from now? If I'm going to go out and staff up a platform team, or if I'm going to take my developers and it depends on the size of the organization. It depends on the tools that we're familiar with. Adding another tool to go out and learn, your developers have already trying to keep up, because AI is making this even more interesting. I was looking at our project here, and I was like, this is kind of neat. I've got my thing out here. I went out and deployed that. I'm in Terraform. Here's my main Terraform file. Hey, Copilot, let's add a key vault and a storage account. I don't even have to spell it right. To my Bicep, or my Terraform deployment, and store the connection string in the key vault, and also reference it as a configuration setting in the web app. And this used to be hard, because I would spend a lot of time going out and doing that. But now the GitHub Copilot with the agent will go out and say, okay, well, I didn't even tell it where to do it, but it's going to go out and it's going to say, okay, well, I've got the main file, so it's probably related to that. So it's going to go out and it'll create the code for me. There's my key vault. It'll follow the patterns and stuff like that. And when it gets done, then it'll go and say, well, do I need to update anything else? I can say, do the same thing for Bicep, do the same thing for Pulumi. So there's my changes. Will those changes work? This is the interesting thing, is I've been using the AI, and it's like to go out and build code, and then I go to run it and it doesn't build. So I put a Copilot instructions in there saying, make sure you build it before you give it back to me. And then it builds it and it finds, oh, there's 5 errors. It's like, oh, okay, fix them. So it iterates through. You notice it's not done. It's still iterating, and the cool thing about it is that the AI is getting to the point where, here, do the same thing. Let's do this. Do the same thing on the other IaC options. So, now my whole shape of this is going to be different for everything. Now, how long would that have taken me to write? It depends. Are you watching? Right. But the idea is that the tools are getting better and better. And where this is doing some of this stuff for me, there, it created all of those files for me. So I could go out and I could see which ones work and which ones don't. Test, write a script to test the deployments. And by the way, I'm using the Copilot and I've got agent mode enabled, which is a new thing that Microsoft announced this week as released to whatever. I can pick the different models I want to use. I'm using GPT-4.1 because I've heard that's pretty good. But if you want to use Claude or Claude Sonnet is supposed to be good, that's new. 4, that wasn't there yesterday. That might be the new one to do. We have to check that out. Of course, you'll have to go out and check it out too, because we're now writing in code and we're building stuff. And yeah, remember, we want to build infrastructure that is going to be repeatable. You don't want something custom that's for each thing you deploy. You want to be able to have environments on demand. I want to be able to change my parameter file and say, here's test, here's QA, here's staging, here's production. And I want to use that same script every single time. And I want to get predictable output from it. Naming things, applying governance, tagging, all of those things are important. But it's like, how do we get to the point where we've got the permit to cloud, where we're building stuff that we can run and rely on, and and bet the bank on? Azure CLI, it's great, very easy to get started. It doesn't handle complex things real well, but it can do a lot of stuff. Looping, you just have to be, if you're a good script writer, okay, well, that's great. ARM, always up to date, native to Azure, but complex, cloud specific. Same thing with Bicep, cloud specific, but it's a lot closer to being a language that I can go out and describe stuff. It's a lot more readable. Terraform, I like Terraform. It's not my go-to. I like Bicep. I tend to go to the Bicep if I can, but I'll use Terraform if I need to. It depends on, who's the client is, who's paying me. And then there's Pulumi. I didn't show Ansible, but that's another infrastructure as code where I could go out and define my infrastructure in a way, but I put it into the code, which is the thing. Language is important. Which clouds can I go to? How do I manage state? That's important. The naming environments. There's a number of different types of things that you might want to go out and take a look at. Questions? We got 2 minutes. Aspire, .NET Aspire is a great service. It's an extension onto .NET that allows me to go out. It's an opinionated way, but it allows me to go out and create applications, microservices, and really dive into how I can go out and do things with it. But it really doesn't apply to this, except that it does use AZD, which is an Azure Developer CLI, to do deployments. And you can do deployments in both Bicep or in Terraform. And there's a number of different templates, and you can create your own templates for AZD that you can use to apply out so you get a consistent pattern on that. That'd be worth something, what we talked about before. So Aspire is a very good thing. I figured I would put this up here because I did ask ChatGPT which one's best. But you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to do? The key is have something besides click to deploy. Have a plan, work with it, and you're not locked in on just one solution. You can use a lot of different things. Does that make sense? If you had fun, say yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming. My name is Mike Benkovich. I'm on LinkedIn. This course, I did a course on LinkedIn Learning that is a lot of the same, the Terraform, Pulumi, and ARM Bicep. It goes in and it's got good stuff. My website, benkotips.com, but give me some feedback. I'd love to hear what you think. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm available to, on the chat, and well, thank you.